We have a really amazing panel here to talk about a really important issue to technology and the law. Tonight we have, on the far left over here, your right, we have David Pashman from General Counsel of Meetup.com. One step over, we have Althea Erickson, policy from Etsy. We have Bruce Kushnick. Bruce, what's your
Networks.
What's that?
New Networks.
New Networks? Yeah. From New Networks. Step further, we have Jonathan Askin from the Blip Clinic and lots of other endeavors. He's one of our advisors here at the New York Legal Hackers. And we also have moderating tonight, we have Nilay Patel, who's the editor-in-chief, newly minted from The Verge. So give them all a great round of applause, and yeah, let's talk about net neutrality.
So just to get us started here, I want everybody to sort of introduce themselves and do just a couple minutes on background and sort of where we begin on the subject, and then we'll begin the debate. So Jonathan, take it away.
All right. Actually, I'd like to find out who you all are, too. Are you, who's heard of the term net neutrality in the audience? Who has not?
They're my nerds.
All right, well, all right. So it's more of
are.
a tech-oriented crowd than I was thinking it was. So I'll give you two data points about myself. I'm a tech law professor at Brooklyn Law School and the University of London. But before that, I was a DC tech policy lobbyist and advocate, FCC official, and I chaired Barack Obama's Internet Governance Working Group during the '08 campaign. So most of what I want to talk about is political dysfunction in Washington, judicial dysfunction in America, technological inability to resolve the net neutrality issues, and where we might try to go from here.
Bruce? So Jonathan just wants all the simple stuff. Bruce?
Oh, well, I thought we were going to have somebody discuss what net neutrality is and all that.
Well, why don't we start with introductions and
okay.
just keep going.
My name is Bruce Kushnick. I'm the executive director of New Networks. I've been a telecom analyst for 32 years. And I just want to read you one thing before we start. Verizon claims for net neutrality that essentially, Verizon claims that net neutrality is based on, Verizon has sued the FCC to stop the FCC from turning what is Title I, which is information services, into Title II, which is a telecommunications service. Verizon claims that if it was a telecommunications service, Title II, it would harm the economy, it would harm their investment, and they've been saying this for the last 8 years. They told the courts that Title II would harm all of their investments in the United States and slow down broadband. I read from Verizon's filing in New York for their cable franchise, legal authority to construct fiber to the premises. Verizon New York is a common carrier under Title II of the Telecommunications Act of 1934, constructing its fiber to the premises network as an upgrade to its existing telecommunications network. In other words, what Verizon has done has told the FCC that broadband is a Title I service with the internet, and what it's done is, on the other side, it said, no, it's Title II. And why they did this is because everybody in the audience who has a phone line in New York was charged for the deployment of the fiber optic wires. All of the POTS customers, plain old telephone service customers, paid for the fiber optic wires, and that is why it is Title II. So I'll be talking about how it's already Title II classified, and that the FCC, all it has to do is basically say, it's Title II already, thank you very much, and open up the networks for competition.
Awesome. Althea, you want to jump up on it?
Sure. Hi, my name is Althea Erickson. I'm the policy director at Etsy. For those who don't know, Etsy is an online marketplace where you can buy and sell vintage and handmade goods from artists, designers, and collectors around the world. We have about 1 million sellers on Etsy worldwide, and together they sold over $1.35 billion worth of goods last year. That success would not have happened without net neutrality, and happy to talk about why Chairman Wheeler's proposal would really hurt both Etsy, the company, and also the 1 million+ sellers who depend on our platform.
Great. David?
Hello everyone, my name is David Pashman. I'm the General Counsel of Meetup. Meetup is the platform that groups like the Legal Hackers Meetup group is organized on. It's a platform for people across the world to join an existing group or start their own group about an interest and meet in the real world and do great things like have a great time in South Street Seaport and learn about net neutrality. So my perspective on this issue is how the proposed rules would affect companies and consumers of internet services such as yourself, and how we can work together to make sure that the new rules protect innovation and companies.
Great. So that's a pretty distinguished panel here. So, Jonathan, you're a law professor. So I'm going to ask you to do the honors of telling us where we were in 2010, what happened with the rule, what happened in the court, and where we are now with the new proposed rule. And I want you to do it in 2 minutes. Yeah, it's a challenge. Now, go as long as you want.
Would it be possible for me to back us up to 2004?
Oh, man. It's a bad year for me. I had a terrible haircut in 2000. You go ahead.
The history is important. I'll tell you why. Because I'm part of the problem. I'm here to tell you that I am a serious part of the problem, and it goes back about 12 years. And I am part of the DC insider perpetual lobby machine problem. Has anyone ever tried to lobby in Washington, D.C.? Any of you here?
That guy's rich.
A little bit. That
guy's
guy I've
rich.
seen in D.C. Yeah.
That guy's rich.
Here's the problem. Every big company in technology has a team of lobbyists in D.C. And no lobbyist gets rewarded for coming up with the right policy result. What they've got to do is demonstrate to the home office that they are bringing value, that they are moving the line of scrimmage, that they are playing a perpetual function for their company. Victory means failure for the lobbyist, unless they can find a new battle. So net neutrality has been one of those battles that, frankly, the lobbyists and Congress have liked to bat around for the past 10 years because no one in DC wins by final resolution of the net neutrality battle. And what do I mean by that? We can't even get immigration reform done in Washington, D.C. This is an A-list essential issue. We can't get NSA surveillance issues resolved in Washington, D.C. This is an A-list policy issue in D.C. Net neutrality, believe it or not, and some of you here may want to disagree with that, is nowhere close to an A-list policy issue in D.C. It's an issue that doesn't necessarily clearly resonate with the American people. It's not something that a normal person in America can say, if net neutrality is resolved this way, then good things will happen. If it's resolved that way, then bad things will happen. It's very tough to communicate that concept to traditional Americans, and therefore Congress doesn't really give a damn about moving net neutrality, with a few exceptions. What they do care about is using those B-list and C-list and D-list tech policy items as vehicles to line their campaign coffers. That's what we've got. And now Congress has successfully lined up the big pockets on either side of this battle. You've got your Etsy's now that they've got their first, are you the first policy person? Are you the first policy person?
And only.
Yeah. You know, 10 years ago, Google had one policy person in DC, and they were part of the battle against Verizon and Comcast for net neutrality. Now they've got an army in DC also. And I don't know if they necessarily want resolution of the net neutrality battle because it keeps them going. And so you've got some people on one side of the net neutrality battle lining half of Congress, some people on the other side of the net neutrality battle lining the other half of Congress. And as long as Congress can keep that functioning from term after term after term, that's the win. That's the end game for Congress.
So let me get to Althea and David over there. You guys actually run companies that really depend on net neutrality, and you are the first policy person as Etsy. So tell me why you're the first policy person at Etsy and why you're fighting this battle as your first campaign.
Yeah, so the focus at Etsy is making Etsy great for the people who sell things on Etsy and the people who buy things on Etsy. So we have just over 600 people that work at Etsy and one person who works on public policy. And to be honest, the majority of my work is focused on advocating for Etsy sellers. Net neutrality is happening to us, and the reason that we're so involved in it is we see it as a fundamental threat, not only to Etsy, the company, and I guess just to break it down, we haven't really sort of said what the chairman is proposing, but basically the way the internet has worked so far, under whatever rules that have existed, all traffic is treated equally on over the pipes that deliver internet to your home. So Etsy has the same chance as an eBay or some little tiny startup you've never heard of bringing their products directly to you in your home. Under the proposal that Chairman Wheeler has made, big companies would be allowed to pay for priority and faster access to you, the consumer. And so that means that not only that startups really would have to have a ton of money in order to buy access to consumers. We see that as a real threat, not only to Etsy's potential growth. We're a low margin business. We only take 3.5% of every transaction. There's no way we could pay for priority access. That hurts not only Etsy, but also the million-plus sellers who depend on our platform, whose sites would load, or whose images would load more slowly than, say, an Amazon or whatever Google's promoting, the companies that could pay. So that's why we're getting engaged. We see it as a fundamental threat to Etsy, our sellers, and also to the startups that haven't even started yet, sort of the next Etsy.
So I have to play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Because that's my job, which is cool. If I'm Comcast or the NCTA, I would say to you, well, it's better for a company like Etsy to be able to pay for priority access so you can compete with a Google that has a CDN, so you can compete with Amazon, which runs the internet's biggest CDN. Why wouldn't you want the ability to pay for faster access?
Well, so we can pay for CDN. I mean, we have a choice. A CDN is like a little bit wonky and technical, right? But Etsy also
What
can.
is a CDN?
A CDN is a content delivery network. So Amazon runs Amazon Web Services, which is, I'm presuming Etsy probably runs some stuff on Amazon's Web Services, because every startup runs in Amazon's cloud. So you can pay Amazon for faster access to its cloud. You can pay, Google can run its own data centers all over the world. So if you're Comcast, your argument is, well, you started a company in your basement, just pay us, Comcast, and your stuff will go faster without this added investment in Amazon's cloud or Google's web data centers.
So the key difference is Etsy right now, and any startup can pay Amazon or another CDN to deliver traffic more quickly through the network. However, there are terminating monopolies that a Comcast or a Verizon have, where they're the only way to get to an end user, and that essentially creates a choke point where they can hold content hostage. And that, I think the fact that those monopolies exist are why we worry about the ability to charge extra to get to those end users, because they're the only one in the game.
Right. So David, you're a general counsel. I'm sure you've talked about this kind of on the big policy side a lot. What's kind of your perspective on where the competition should lie?
When you say the competition, what do you mean by competition in what market?
I mean, there's the facilities-based consumer market. Right. There is the sort of the web services data distribution market.
Right. So ideally, you need a competitive market at all points along the chain.
Closer?
Ideally, you need a highly competitive market at all points along the content delivery network, from the edge providers, which is another wonky term we'll use, which are like the Netflix and the Amazons and the people that you think of as the companies that are getting the content to you, all the way through what people call the last mile, which is your consumer internet service like Verizon, Fios, or Time Warner Cable. So there needs to be competition in all levels of that delivery, or government regulation to prevent discrimination. And so we haven't really talked about what the new proposal is and how it would attempt to regulate or not regulate the segment of the internet delivery between the access to the network and the last mile. So we should probably step back and talk about the distinction between Title I and Title II.
By all means.
Right. So I guess at its highest level of abstraction, what Althea mentioned is that the rules that the chairman has proposed would allow the broadband access providers to discriminate against certain types of traffic. And presumably that discrimination would be price-based, so it would allow people that could pay more for faster access. The regime that we've been operating under up until recently has de facto prohibited that discrimination, so that all companies could compete equally by having their content delivered along the same lines. And what the new rules propose is that the broadband access providers would be able to engage in certain types of discrimination. And the fail-safe that we've been told by the FCC that would prevent all of the horrible things like people not being able to watch their Netflix or not be able to purchase on Etsy or not be able to access Meetup is that there's this test that they're proposing which would allow commercially reasonable arrangements but prevent unreasonable arrangements. And so the problem with that is that no one knows what that means, and it's incredibly difficult and time-consuming for companies to go through the legal process to argue that something is unreasonable or commercially unreasonable discrimination. And so what we really need, in addition to a competitive marketplace, are clear, bright-line rules that allow innovative companies and the people that are going to invest in them to understand how these companies are going to be able to access consumers and deliver their services.
Great. So I've saved our telco representative for last, and I think what I'm teasing both of you. You have networks in your company name, so I'm going for it. But you opened by talking about how Verizon is jumping back and forth between two different regulatory regimes, and I think you call it title shopping. So Bruce, can you kind of explain how Verizon is using the system as it exists now to its own advantage? At least, that's your argument.
Right. Essentially what happened, I have to just step back 1 second. There was something called the Telecommunications Act of 1996. It basically said there's a wire in your home, you can pick your own internet provider, you can pick your own broadband provider, you can pick your own cable provider. It wasn't one company offering all the services. In 2004, under Michael Powell, Chairman Michael Powell, the FCC basically said no. From now on, the wire is basically one company's property, and then essentially all of the services on that, all of the primary services, like your internet service, your broadband service, your cable service, was by one company. This was called vertically integrating products. Now, net neutrality is caused because there is no other way to get on the net. You have one company, and that's it. You either, the ISP puts you onto the net or doesn't. If you had competition, there would basically be the ability for you to say, you know, this guy's screwing me over, I'm going to just change companies. So, what we found basically is as follows. Verizon is claiming that to the FCC that it's an information service, the broadband service, we're allowed to vertically integrate all of our products, and we own that wire. They've told the state, however, that basically it's a Title II service, meaning it's telecommunications, it's part of the state utility, and therefore there are obligations that it should have. Now, our finding was, in the year 2006, Verizon was able to get multiple rate increases from basic customers to pay for the fiber optic wires known as Fios. They did this in every state. However, Fios is also a cable service, and it looks like Verizon has been able to charge the POTS customers, the low-income families, the seniors, the small businesses, for a cable service, a broadband service, as well as the connections to the wireless service. What we found was that the wires to the cell towers, every cell tower basically is attached to a wire, was dumped into the cost of local service, and Verizon's wireless company is paying a fraction of the cost. So what we feel is as follows. We got to, A, it's already Title II, it's already paid for by customers, those networks should be reopened to all competitors immediately. 2, everybody who paid for it should be able to get it, including all of the commercial areas of the city of New York, which are not part of the original franchise for cable. Moreover, the affiliates themselves have been paying a fraction of what other companies would pay. Time Warner pays $1.24 to itself for the use of its high-speed internet. It charges the customer an average of $34. If the networks were open, Time Warner's internet service would have to compete with everybody else and pay the same amount, i.e., then there's money to actually build out the fiber optic networks. So what we're suggesting is that the affiliate companies that have taken control of the wire need to be separated from the wire, and that the wires need to be open to all competitors today. There'd be enough money then to wire the rest of the state of New York and the rest of the country.
And
thank you.
To be clear, this debundling is happening. It happens in the UK. It happens throughout Europe.
Right. And
prices there are much lower and speeds are much higher than we could even dream of here. So I want to come back to something you said, Jonathan, which is this isn't a tier 1 issue for people. Because I write about net neutrality a lot. I petitioned my readers of The Verge to war dial the FCC. I believe we crashed the FCC, which makes me very proud. God bless Verge readers, the chaotic bastards that they are. But they got like hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of comments.
700,000.
700,000. And tons of phone calls. And yet, this public outcry doesn't seem to have moved the needle too much. Why do you think that is?
Well, we'll see. We've never really seen anything like... We saw this once before. So I think this actually might be moving the needle in a way that the FCC and DC has never seen and never anticipated. We moved the needle 2 years ago with the SOPA PIPA battle. If you recall, that was the first time that there was a real, genuine public outcrying over an obscure tech policy issue, and it scared the crap out of Congress. I think this may serve the same result. I don't know that what comes of this is going to be something that's particularly good for people, because I think DC is in a quandary about where to turn. We can't turn. I don't know that the FCC is going to have the spine to unscramble the egg and oppose, again, Title II authority to call the broadband networks telecommunications common carrier services. I don't know that this FCC is going to have the spine to do that. I'm sure at this point the DC Circuit and the Supreme Court probably also do not have the spine, because they think that they're, if you look at the DC Circuit and the majority of the Supreme Court, they claim to be strict constructionists, and it's too difficult at this point for anyone to convince either the DC Circuit or the Supreme Court that there is a plausible way to read the Telecom Act to allow for reestablishment of Title II authority. I think so. Short of Congress revisiting the issue, or probably short of a bona fide antitrust battle against the cable co's and the phone company cabal, we may be stuck in this unknown territory for the next several years.
A stunning vision of hope. Thank you.
It already is Title II, period. Let's start with the beginning. It already is Title II. It's in every document that Verizon has for every cable franchise in every state. You have to understand that the question is did Verizon commit some kind of illegal act or ethical act by not telling Congress, the FCC, or the courts that their networks were Title II, and have continually told it that basically it would harm the investment in their networks, when in the same breath they said, well, we're spending all this money on FiOS. So my feeling is we need to tell the FCC it's already Title II. All you got to do, you don't have to even do reclassify. Just say it's Title II already, dear Verizon. Why shouldn't we make it Title II for the rest of the networks?
Right.
Well,
maybe my cynicism is overstated. Look, although I'm a guy who in 2008 worked with the Obama administration crafting tech policy, we believed in memorializing net neutrality as a principle of this government. We got an FCC
and just to be clear, Obama walked around the campaign trail, his first campaign, and said, no one is a stronger supporter of net neutrality than I am. And yet here we are 8 years later, 7 years later, in this quandary.
That's dead on right. We thought that the Obama FCC would have had the spine to unscramble the egg, to reassert telecom authority over the broadband networks, to recognize these broadband pipes as the telecommunications infrastructure of the digital age. That's what we thought. Now, if we didn't get it from Julie Chendikowski, I'm skeptical we're ever going to get it from Tom Wheeler.
I want to unpack that for a little bit farther. I want to talk about Wheeler in detail, but my question for you, David, is if you're a cable company, if you're Comcast, and I think this is a problem, you can talk about Verizon's pipes and wires all day long, but Comcast exists, and Comcast is the future, right? They're not going to get smaller. They only want to get bigger. And what they will tell you is that, well, we have a clear regulatory environment. We understand how this works right now, and our investors are betting on our increased ability to monetize the pipes in the ground right now. And if you change the regulatory environment and we have to go through a Title II reclassification and then get rid of all the rules that apply to 1934 telephone service, which is something we would have to do if we reclassify, then our ability to make money goes up in a poof of instability and our investors will walk away. What's a rule that gets you past that as Verizon? What's a rule that you could propose that gets you past Comcast? What's a rule that you could propose that calms down Comcast and its investors who are very ardent that this is a huge problem for them?
I guess I would say it's the rule of telling the truth, because if they were to say that, that would be a lie. And so there's two aspects to that. the first general principle that any change in a legal regime is destabilizing to the investment community and will result in their investors walking away is not a basis for a system of law. Rules have been changed before, and this is not the first time to do that. So I don't think that investment expectation should constrain or handcuff a regulatory agency or a judicial decision. The second point, with respect to them claiming that there is this stable, clear, regulatory, rule-based regime, is also untrue. Because they would be claiming that, presumably, well, we're Title I, and we're prohibited from engaging in commercially unreasonable discrimination. But the truth is, we've had a de facto open internet net neutrality system that basically is what companies like mine and Althea is arguing for all the time. So, not to get into the weeds of how the system was enforced and declared, but the system that existed before the court decision in January was basically a de facto open internet order that treated Comcast and Verizon as Title II common carriers and prevented the discrimination that we're seeking to prevent now by enacting these rules. So both aspects of what they would be claiming are just untrue.
So, but what is a rule? They're going to keep claiming it.
Right.
And they have a lot of money to pay lawyers to claim it as loudly as those lawyers can.
Right.
What is a compromise you could bring to those lawyers and to Comcast to actually break through the logjam besides you're a liar? Which, just trust me,
that would not be my my negotiating strategy towards compromise.
It's been mine. I'm telling you, it doesn't work. Right. So I'm wondering what yours would be.
Right. So I guess the first thing to recognize is the trajectory of trying to reach a compromise with the Comcast and the Verizons of the world. I don't know if that can be reached, and I'm certainly not the person to negotiate that path. But the rule that I would propose, which I am on the record as supporting, would be the clear Title II-based common carrier regulatory scheme that prohibits price discrimination and requires all of the carriers to treat all traffic equally. So that is that might not be a rule that Comcast likes, but that is the clear rule that it basically enforces the de facto regime that we have existed under since the past several years that existed before the January court decision.
Right. So Althea, I'm curious for your take on this as well. Also working for a smaller company, one of Comcast's big concessions to the FCC and the FTC as they buy Time Warner, or they tried to buy Time Warner Cable, is we'll just agree to that rule for a longer period of time, which, if you're Comcast, is great because you're already making a bunch of money. If you're an activist, it seems like kicking the can down the road because by the time all the systems are integrated, you're just ready to squeeze everybody. And if you're trying to reach a compromise, it seems like hurry up and wait. So what's your take on their sort of, we're going to hold on to this, you let us buy Time Warner Cable and we'll keep the status quo for a little bit longer. Does that work for you, or do you think that it needs to be more broadly applied in maybe a Title II kind of fashion?
I mean, I just don't see how that's a solution. It does feel to me like kicking the can down the road, especially because, I don't see their position changing or becoming more flexible as they get greater and greater market share and become a stronger and stronger monopoly. And so it seems to me that at this moment where you have sort of the internet rising up and saying protect our internet, this feels like the moment to say Title II or however you say it. I think where we fall out is we don't want to live in a world of paid prioritization. We don't want to. That's not a world we want to live in. If you can do it a different way than Title II, that's great. It just doesn't seem like you can. And when you ask people, okay, if you take it as a given, you want no paid prioritization, no blocking, and no discrimination, I can't find a lawyer that says you can do it outside of Title II.
But
so I don't see how you compromise.
We actually did find one lawyer who said that. His name was Julius Chinikowski,
right.
And he kind of whiffed, right? He swung for the fences and whiffed.
But then didn't the D.C. Circuit Court say,
right?
No. So given that decision, doesn't that say that compromise position doesn't exist?
Right.
And then if you agree with the principles of no paid prioritization, no blocking, and no discrimination, I just don't see how you get there.
Right. So this is my question for you, Tom Wheeler, who I'm sure you're listening to us right now. Jonathan, how does Wheeler get there? Because what he's proposed right now gets you 2 of the 3, but it doesn't get you away from paid prioritization. And he's heard this outcry. And what I'm asking this panel over and over again is, what's the solution beyond Title II?
How many people have heard of the social contract? Not Rousseau, the Time Warner social contract, the Comcast social contract. In 1995, all of the cable companies signed an agreement with the FCC. They wanted more money from the customers so that they could upgrade the internet service and broadband service and wire all the schools in their existing territories. The contract was also gave the phone companies the cable companies $5 more a month per customer to pay for this. The expenses were supposed to stop in the year 2000. The schools were all supposed to be wired. Unfortunately, after 14 years, we can't find any schools that were wired under this contract, nor did we see them stop collecting the money. So, from our perspective, the first question is did they take the money through 2000 and 2014 to upgrade the networks to broadband, and did they wire the schools? And if they didn't, well, maybe that's a negotiating point that we should worry about. Two, it turns out that Verizon Wireless, which has a deal with Verizon Wired, has a deal with Comcast and Time Warner to bundle their products in areas where they don't do FiOS. This is a non-compete clause.
Oh, you are. There you go. Keep on.
This is the non-compete clause, meaning that in those areas, Verizon Wireless and Verizon Online, Verizon Wired, have cut a deal with the cable company to not compete. So, if you're talking about the Time Warner Comcast deal, isn't it interesting that they're going to stop all competition by having this wireline, wireless cable deal? So, from my perspective, what we should be doing is going after the dirty laundry and airing it so that people know that these things happened, as well as use it as negotiating tools to bring it back. One last thing. In the Time Warner AOL deal, the networks were supposed to be open to competition and all internet providers. That didn't happen. It only happened sporadically. We should go back to saying in those mergers, they should have the networks open to all competition.
I think my question, and this is what I want you to answer, I think it's clear that everybody hates the telco monopolies and the cable company. Does anybody here love their cable company? Anybody in New York City love their cable company? That's obvious. That's where this hatred is coming from and where this public animosity towards whatever is happening at the FCC is coming from. Even if you can't define what they want, they know that Comcast wants something and they don't want Comcast to get what it wants. So the question is, how do you turn that into something positive? How do you turn it into something understandable? And how do you turn it into something achievable in our current political climate? And that's what I'm asking you to do.
All right, so here's how I think it will play out moderately successfully over the next couple of years. The FCC has two vehicles that currently work. They can use merger conditions. They can use the bully pulpit.
You gotta talk.
They can use merger conditions and the bully pulpit. And in addition to merger conditions, there's a couple other vehicles in which they can extract temporary concessions from the phone companies and the cable companies to ensure that they don't violate net neutrality rules. Now, frankly, I got to say, the big phone companies, the big cable companies are scared to death about flagging the fact that there's a bigger problem than they want government to think there is. So for the past 10 years, they've been pretty good actors. They've been trying to sort of indicate to government there's no problem here, and they freak out every time a smaller internet access provider does something wrong. Because they say, there's a bad actor demonstrating what can be done. We're not behaving that way. Trust us, we're going to be good actors going forward. Now, I don't think the FCC has done enough in the merger context. I think to the extent that they've supported every single vertical merger, Time Warner, NBC, Comcast, NBC being the most egregious of those, I think they've done a disservice to the American people. I think they've got to figure out ways to vertically separate, even if it's within the same company, the ability to provide access and the content that they're providing over those pipes. And that may mean coming up with something like a performance metrics process. So Comcast can offer NBC content, but the way they offer NBC content is the way they've got to treat every other content provider out there. They can't give preferential treatment to NBC. Fox needs the same rights of access. Netflix needs the same right of access. Amazon Prime needs the same right of access. So there are a couple tricks like that that I think the FCC has at its disposal that it can impose unless and until, I think one of two big things is ultimately going to happen. At some point, the American people are going to recognize we are falling so far behind the rest of the world in our ability to encourage startup enterprises here and to encourage consumer control of their video and internet experience, that there's going to be a backlash either through antitrust laws or through a new statutory framework that will reestablish common carrier oversight over the internet access, the broadband providers. Does that answer? Did I miss a piece?
No, you got it. It's good. It's done. We can go home, everybody. No, that stuff is super wonky, right? And this is the challenge. Building the political capital, the momentum to accomplish one of two very wonky outcomes. So I guess my question to you, Althea, is you've got a big network of Etsy sellers, and you're telling us that this is going to deeply affect them if it breaks the wrong way. How do you talk about it to them? How do you motivate them to go and participate in the process?
Yeah, I guess one thing I'd say is that it's not a legal sort of compromise problem, it's a political problem. And that is a solvable, hopefully, a somewhat solvable problem. So we have started to organize Etsy sellers. As soon as they hear about it, they're very upset. We have this sort of self-organized groups of teams. There's a new team that just started around net neutrality. And I think one of our goals is to start getting the Etsy sellers who would be negatively impacted by these rules in front of the FCC, in front of Congress, in front of the White House, to say, look, this can't happen. Like all of this sort of upsetness and anger and activism has a real impact, I guess, is coming from a real place, and these rules will have a negative impact on real small business owners and micro business owners.
Can you give me
I don't know if that's helpful, though, because I guess I would just say that Etsy sellers aren't giving a ton of money to various politicians in D.C., and the only road I see to getting the rules we want is if it's everybody in the world saying one thing except Comcast, Verizon, Time Warner, like the 5 big companies or whatever it is. And I don't, that's a job that we have to do between now and the end of the year when they make the decision.
So I think this year we've actually borne witness to the perfect political economic third rail analogy. And we have to figure out how to play this, I think we as a community. So what happened over the past year? Edward Snowden revealed that the NSA has been working with American-based internet companies to reveal consumer information to the government. And as a result, the rest of the world and many American consumers and internet users freaked out. This administration never really gave much political weight to the alternative to compelling and letting the NSA get access to internet data about consumers, until it became apparent that the rest of the world and the internet companies were freaking out, and it was going to potentially mean a multi-billion-dollar capital flight from America to other countries. Brazil, Spain are talking about building an alternative internet. Don't use Google, use the Brazilian equivalent. New companies that will sanctify your privacy. So it wasn't until it became an economic issue for this government that the government said, we need to have this conversation, because there was no counterbalance on the NSA issue. Now we've got the potential to reframe what's going on in net neutrality as a bona fide economic issue. What do we have on one side of the battle? You've got Comcast and Verizon and AT&T with infrastructure committed to America. They can't offshore their infrastructure. Their infrastructure exists here. Government should not be scared about Verizon and AT&T and Comcast taking their pipes and moving them to South America. They may build in South America, but they're not moving the pipes here. They got a business here. They're committed to that business here. Who is not necessarily committed to that business here? It's the internet companies without infrastructure. It's the people selling online without infrastructure. The Netherlands just passed a legislation this year memorializing net neutrality in the Netherlands. To me, that should be a red flag to this government. That internet-based companies, Etsy, the Etsy community, the Meetup community might recognize that the Netherlands might be a more viable place for them to do business, because they are going to have fairer access to consumers over an open internet than they will in America. That's the thing that's, I think, ultimately going to scare government.
But wouldn't they have fairer access to a much smaller group of consumers? I mean, the Netherlands is wonderful. I've been there. I don't remember much of it. But it's a much smaller community.
On one hand, no. The internet, the Etsy company, the Etsy user can be based in the Netherlands, and so one half of their equation has open access. Does that mean they're going to be curbed throughout the rest of the world? There might be some curtailment, but at least one half of their pipe is open, and that's the half of the pipe where the company is. So the company could be situated there. They could still be selling to consumers in America. There might be some pushback from the American internet access providers, but at least they know they're working in a haven that has open. So one half of their equation, one half of their one-on-one internet communications experience is originating from a country with open internet principles and no gatekeeper trying to gouge them on that side.
This sound work? Oh, go ahead.
But another way to look at it is that, yes, the markets in those other communities might be significantly smaller, but if you look... Is that better? Okay. If you look at where the earlier stage innovation is going to happen, it's entirely viable that it could happen in those smaller markets, because that's a place where, with open internet orders that are enforced by law, those companies can develop and get to a scale that then proves they're viable as broader businesses. So if you take a look at, don't look at Etsy today or Meetup today, look at our companies, in Meetup's case 10 years ago, in Etsy's case maybe 4 years ago, when they were looking to raise a small amount of capital and start a business, and know that they would be able to go out and reach all of the potential users on equal terms to an Amazon. And they could do that for just, a few, not necessarily a few $1,000s, but $50,000 or $100,000 or a few $1 million. Whereas if they had to compete with an Amazon or an eBay, they would need tens of millions of dollars to hire teams of lawyers and regulatory attorneys to negotiate those deals with Comcast. So don't just look at the ability of companies to reach markets when they're at scale, but look at the market for innovation where companies are going to need to develop their businesses.
Well, so let me play super devil's advocate here. If you're a consumer and you're watching YouTube, you want Google to pay for YouTube to be faster because it's the dominant market provider of video streaming, right? And if you're a startup, it's actually better for you to, in a market of many, many startups, to be able to dedicate some revenue to accessing the consumer faster. Or it's better for you to go towards an incubator. I mean, there are market solutions towards we need faster access, right? So if there is paid prioritization, the consumer might benefit because the big companies to whom the consumer will go will likely pay, so they get faster service. And the little companies can find some sort of market solution. They can gang together, they can come together and incubate. All of you are shaking your heads at me like I'm crazy. This is what the cable companies will tell you. They will absolutely tell you this. Why does that sound crazy to you?
Because it's false.
Well,
so you just presume that the smaller
by the way,
companies...
I just want to point out, the lawyer was like, it's false, and the law professor was like, but let me tell you why.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I'd like to explain that.
Okay. So I don't know what those market solutions for the smaller companies would be, because we're talking about the market for capital to pay for prioritization, and small companies don't have capital to negotiate those deals and pay for those deals. So that's just false that the smaller companies can find a market solution. And then addressing the first part of your point, which is that the consumers benefit because, well, they want Google to be able, or Netflix to be able to deliver their content faster. In a world of paid prioritization, nobody would have Facebook. We'd all be stuck with MySpace because MySpace was the incumbent.
But they would. You think they would have outspent? I mean, you got to prove that. You've got to be able to show the harm.
Hold on, wait.
Okay.
There's something called the no lane.
I have very quickly become the bad guy.
There's the fast lane, there's the slow lane, and there's the no lane. You have to understand, we live in an area where there's at least some choice. Right now, Verizon his plan is to shut off 50% of their territories and put everybody on wireless. AT&T has filed to do the same thing under the IP transition. AT&T claims that in one of the IP transition tests, where they want to go from regular phone service to IP service, they are going to shut off 60% of the people in a city called Carbon Hill, Alabama, claiming it's good for them because they're going to give them wireless. Now, wireless is, of course, has bandwidth caps and not the same speed, and they're not going to upgrade to UVerse, even though that upgrades anywhere. So, and Verizon is not upgrading 80% of the municipalities in the state of New York. So, fast lane, slow lane, we're stuck with no lane, and things are going to get slower because wireless is going to be more expensive and it's going to be not as fast as people think.
Can I hit your Google
Go ahead.
So I just want to hit the Google YouTube point because Google had a video product that they launched that ultimately YouTube was the startup that ultimately Google decided to acquire, was able to acquire. And I don't think, because it was a better product and was able to demonstrate that it could grow and build a user base, in a world where Google would have been able to pay for priority access to its, frankly, crappy initial video product, YouTube, even though it was better for consumers, would never have succeeded.
I mean, I'm just going to push back, and then everyone's going to yell at me again. No, but is that true? Is it absolutely true? Is it provably true that and Google Video was a crap product, that if Google Video loaded faster than YouTube, people would have used it more?
So there are definitely studies which show that a delay of milliseconds has a direct negative impact on revenue, not only at the moment of decision making on the consumer side, but also long-lasting impact. And so, yeah, I think milliseconds matter.
Fair, but YouTube had the content, right? So people wait on YouTube because that's where the stuff is.
But if a consumer was like going to click on that video and it took just a second longer to load, they're going to click away from that YouTube video, and YouTube's not going to be able to build that user base or that market. Their product depends on the ability to load quickly.
Sure. So I'm going to keep going down this road because I cover startups all day long, and I cover big companies all day long. And there are many barriers for a startup to overcome that cost money if you want to go compete in the market. If you want to be in the App Store, you need a beautiful icon, right? That's a thing you need. Yeah. You need beautiful UX. Those things cost lots and lots of money to achieve, and they cost lots and lots of effort. Why shouldn't access be just another cost of doing business in this market?
So I guess Bruce or Jonathan can probably explain this better from a telecommunications law perspective, but there is no monopoly being controlled by, or rather, there's no choke point on icons for the App Store. There's no choke point on engineers. There is a highly competitive market for talent and for all of the other things that you need in order to compete successfully as an entrepreneur, as a startup. The issue of open access and net neutrality is that the broadband access providers have this chokehold on the internet service. They are, in effect, a monopoly or a duopoly, and that is why they need to be regulated as public utilities, as common carriers. There are absolutely many things that you need to be successful as a company that you need money to buy, but those things are not being controlled by a small number of companies.
So let me give you. I have truly. No one claps.
It's not
no
often that a lawyer gets applauded at a public venue, so thank you.
These people are drunk. I just want to be clear.
So am I, though. So.
But no, let me take it to wireless, which is something that has come up. And just so you guys know, right now, wireless is not regulated even as loosely as wireline services. So a company like T-Mobile, they make announcements that are ostensibly wonderful for the consumer, like Music Unlimited. So if you're a T-Mobile customer, you can stream as much Spotify as you want. You can stream as much RDO as you want. There's a handful of other services involved in this deal. And they just decided by fiat to exclude these services. Now, that to me on its face is a violation of every principle we've just talked about, right? They're prioritizing that content, and they're saying we're not going to charge you against your cap for it. But as a consumer, that's great, because if you are a lower income customer of T-Mobile and that's your primary access device, you just got free music. So where is the balance there?
So you're demonstrating the failure of the wireline broadband network. T-Mobile is the exception proving the potential for success in the wireline world. Where the hell is the T-Mobile of wireline broadband? That's the dilemma. If you look at what T-Mobile is, T-Mobile's, in America, the competitive check on the monopoly, on the oligopic wireless cabal. Back in Germany, T-Mobile.
We're all the way to cabal now.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what do we
just
have?
Want to be clear. Okay.
It's an absolute cabal. If you look, you got wireline AT&T and wireline Verizon, which own the two largest wireless networks. Without T-Mobile and without Sprint, we would see in the wireless world exactly what we see in the wireline world. So I say the answer may be create the T-Mobile of wireline. But AT&T, Comcast, Verizon won't let that happen. Every time anyone has tried to insinuate a competitive check on wireline broadband, Verizon has gone screaming to the state legislatures and state commissions and saying this is unlawful. You look what Philadelphia, if anyone remembers, Philadelphia tried to create a municipal broadband network. All right, and what happens? They got it in Philadelphia. Verizon goes to Harrisburg and cries bloody murder to the state legislature, and they outlaw municipal broadband throughout Pennsylvania.
They gave checks to everybody in the legislature too, by the way, just so you know. I'm serious.
So no, I had mixed. So a few years ago, Google was considering bidding for broadband wireless spectrum.
Yep.
All right, something called the there was a big wireless auction. They were thinking about bidding for a big swath of the spectrum. They did not. They did not win that spectrum. Instead, Verizon and AT got the preponderance of that new broadband spectrum, which is being used for 4G broadband networks. Now, I had mixed reactions about whether or not I wanted Google to win that spectrum. In one regard, at least in the short run, Google could very well have been that T-Mobile of broadband check on Verizon and AT&T's networks. I have some concerns that they probably would have been co-opted by the power of the dark side.
Wait, so I would actually argue that Google got completely co-opted in that auction. So let me unpack this story very quickly. We gave up a big chunk, when we moved to HD television, we gave a big chunk of analog TV spectrum, and then we resold it basically to build high-speed wireless networks. Google lobbied very successfully for a condition of that auction to be open access, so that whoever built a network on that spectrum would have to let any device connect to it. And the provision was triggered at a certain dollar number. So Google bid to make sure they hit the number. Their final bid was pi billion dollars, $3.1415 billion. A bunch of Google lawyer nerds like high-fived and like chugged a beer when that happened. And then Verizon won. And Google's plan was always to let Verizon win. But if you're like me and you're a tech reporter, you remember that what happened next is that Google very desperately wanted to compete with the iPhone, and they wanted to put out an Android phone at the quality and scale that they needed to compete with the iPhone. The iPhone at the time was not available on Verizon, so Google cut a deal with Verizon to launch the Droid product with Motorola, and immediately walked back all of their net neutrality principles. And Verizon, which won the auction, there is no way, that open access provision applies to Verizon. There's no way to get a device on Verizon's network. You can try, you can go to their store, you can scream bloody murder, you can get a SIM card, you can do all this stuff. It won't work. And Google has no interest. They're probably the only company, the only party that's interested in such a provision. And they don't care because they're selling millions of Android phones. So yeah, they got co-opted. By the way, I've completely flipped from the dark side to the light side. Would anyone like to say what the cable company would say to you now? No, I mean, but this is a feature of our system, right? It's designed to let these companies make money. So how do you bring the consumer interest into it in a way that can fight all of this money?
The goal is always ultimately let the free market prevail when the free market can prevail. But I think David pointed to the irresolvable problem where we need this very limited government intercession. And that's where there is, at best, two choices in the last mile for consumer access. You've got an infinite supply of internet companies desperate to reach you, but for the fact that they have two gatekeepers to go through, and without just a smidgen of government oversight, they will extract usurious revenues right up to the point where it becomes, the internet company says, boy, that's almost more than I want to pay, but it's just low enough that I guess I got to pay it because I need the consumer. That's the market. That's what the free market will result in without any oversight over the gatekeeper to the consumer.
So how, beyond unbundling, how would you guys propose creating a real competitor to Comcast, Verizon, Time Warner? Is there a way to do it?
What's wrong with unbundling?
Well, I think it's political suicide, so try something else.
What? I'm not positive about that.
Go ahead.
I think it's a light touch Title II authority with net neutrality being memorialized in Title II, not in Title I, not in Section 706.
Questions? Okay, I'm being told it's time for questions. So
That was an abrupt ending.
yeah, it just happened to me. Go ahead.
So you believe it's political suicide to not try unbundling, or that it wouldn't work? You believe that it's political suicide to try unbundling, or you believe it won't work?
I will tell you that every lawmaker I've talked to knows that the American people want this and know that they will get run either extremely to the middle on the issue or they get run out of the Republican Party. That's what's going to happen. So on that extraordinarily cheerful note, let's take some questions.
Okay, questions are actually over here, so step down to here if you want to ask a question. And I'd like to kick things off. I'm from the Internet Society, and a little while ago I saw Barbara Van Schwick speak at NYU, and she talked about how, in fact, in Europe, where they have the unbundling, because there's a lot more competition, it's a lot cheaper, but because these guys are all struggling to make the most money per bit, there's more dodgy network practices going on over there than here, where, these incumbents, they've got all the capacity they want. There is no congestion, and so they don't really have any real reason, apart from perhaps, blocking them so they can milk a bit of money from the likes of Netflix to actually do any net neutrality. So there isn't really so much of a problem, but so that that's the first thing I'd ask you about. I have a follow-up to that. And so her suggestion is, but would you, if you've got a narrow pipe, you can only afford so much bandwidth, you might not want to discriminate amongst your traffic so that your video comes in faster and uninterrupted. And Tim Wu, who invented net neutrality, has also kind of backed this principle, which is user-centric discrimination. Do you have any comments?
Well, ultimately, it should be the consumer's choice. There are network management reasons to want to discriminate against certain types of delivery. Some content needs low latency, some content needs high quality. So there are always going to be those reasons. But the problem emerges when you've got Time Warner not wanting to cannibalize its core video delivery offering and wants people to get its channelized video and recognizes that if Netflix or Amazon Prime is an alternative, they've got an unfair, inordinate ability to discriminate against Netflix vis-a-vis its own video delivery network. So they can't discriminate apples to apples. That would be the answer. You can't say Time Warner can allow NBC to get better access and not allow Netflix to get equal access to the consumers. That's the dilemma. So maybe, to me, it's almost a matter, I said before, performance metrics. Treat NBC the way you would treat any other unaffiliated video content delivery provider.
So I had hi, Dana. I had one answer to your question about how you create an alternative, and that is to make sure that every city in every state around the country has the ability to build what's right for them. And that's actually something that has been somewhat supported by the FCC, but it's unclear that it's actually going to happen, but certainly against what the cable cos and cellcos want. But my question is, there are at least a handful of lawyers present, and I've been having some discussions and doing some thinking on this. How is it? We've been talking a lot about the internet, and really the internet is two things. There's the services on which is what the capital I internet actually is, which is a purely virtual type of thing. And then there's the infrastructure, the physical wires and the cables and the network equipment. So it seems to me that a lot of the discussion, especially in internet circles, confuses the two. And separate from how we help the internet community understand that there is a very big difference between the internet and the wires on which it runs, I'm curious, how is it that the Telecom Act actually distinguishes between these two fundamentally different things? And how is it that the FCC, which wrote the Telecom Act, and the Congress that wrote the Telecom Act, how is it that they keep on confusing these things, and how can we make it so that they can really treat these two fundamentally different things, the wires and then the things that run on top of the wires, as separate things from a regulatory perspective?
All right, Dana. At the beginning of this panel, I admitted that this is partially my fault. And Dana hit on the core issue. I'm not kidding. This is my fault. About 11 years ago, 10 years ago, the FCC came out with an order that they called the Pulver Order. I was the lawyer for Pulver. And what we had asked the FCC to do was to say, has anyone heard of free world dial-up besides my students? All right, a few folks. All right. So free world dial-up, arguably, by many analysts' accounts, was Skype before Skype was Skype. It was the first real peer-to-peer voice communications network in the world that ran across computers. But it allowed for voice communications. So the idiot lawyer for Pulver, me, said we got to ask the FCC if what we're doing is or is not a telecom service. So in lightning speed, like a year and a half, the FCC says that this voice communications network that doesn't have any access, any control of any infrastructure, it's just 2 meet points on the open internet, is not a telecom service and is not subject to telecom regulation. That was great. A couple paragraphs later, the FCC did something we didn't ask them to do, and we didn't think it was a huge problem at the time, although some people said it was probably going to be a big problem. The FCC says, you're not a telecom service, but you are an information service. And that sounded pretty cool, because at the time there were essentially no real significant onerous regulations on information services. They weren't common carriers. They weren't subject to this Title II onerous obligations to do all this stuff. So we weren't that concerned. But then a whole series of Me Too petitions came after that decision. AT&T filed a Me Too petition. Verizon filed a Me Too petition. Vonage filed a Me Too petition. They all said that the service that they offered, just like Pulver's free will dial-up service, is not a telecom service. It's an information service. And one by one, the FCC decided, you know what, you're right. These are also not telecom services. Until we were left with a world where all the dominoes had fallen, and Verizon's broadband internet access service is not a telecom service, it's an information service, even though Verizon controls this fiber in the ground, this copper in the ground being used, the facilities. So there has to be a qualitative distinction between an information service that just rides on the open internet and an information service that is completely tethered to the infrastructure in the soil and in the air on American property. So that's a distinction that the FCC and government has failed to make, but that's the essential distinction I think they have to make. If you control the infrastructure, guess what? You're getting a special grant from the American people, and with that right comes a lot of responsibility. And it should be treated differently than the disembodied internet application that rides over those pipes.
Just a quick follow-up. So I'm familiar with the Pulver order and everything that happened, but why is Verizon just an information service? Why is Verizon FiOS not an infrastructure that's regulated in one way, and then a video service, a telephone service, and an internet access service that are separately regulated in under separate titles or whatever you have?
Legal wordsmanship and a DC Circuit and a Supreme Court that were comfortable with the FCC interpretation of the Telecom Act. Now, the FCC could have said that, yes, the FiOS service is a telecommunications service in the infrastructure layer, and it's an information service at the application layer. The FCC could have said that. They didn't say that because they wanted, frankly, I thought they were being extorted by the cable companies and the phone companies to build out broadband networks. The FCC wanted to see broadband built out. The cable companies, the phone companies said, we'll do it if we are guaranteed this latitude to build it out as unregulated telecom services. So the FCC, the Republican FCC, wrote orders saying that these broadband pipes are just information services with something called telecommunications, not with telecommunication services. So they won't be regulated telecommunication services. And the DC Circuit and then the Supreme Court both said that this is a reasonable interpretation of the Telecom Act. Now, that doesn't mean the FCC could have said the opposite. The FCC could easily have said the opposite and said that this is, in fact, a telecommunications service, and we're regulating it this way and that way pursuant to our Title II authority. And the Supreme Court would have also said, FCC, this is a reasonable interpretation of the Telecom Act. So, and now the phone companies, the cable companies will have us believe that the Supreme Court said, in fact, They are information services. They are not telecommunication services. That's gospel. That cannot change according to this Telecom Act. Congress has to rewrite it. That doesn't have to happen. The FCC can say that these are, in fact, telecommunication services. They would apply what's called Chevron deference. They would explain the rationale for unscrambling the egg and saying it's no longer Title I, it's Title II. And the Supreme Court would probably say, there was a reasonable analysis by the FCC. We understand they are the absolute policy arbiter on this issue. We're going to grant them the authority to have changed their mind under these circumstances.
Just two quick questions. The first is, I thought there was a net neutrality element to the Comcast-NBC Universal merger from years ago. So just so you could clarify on that. And then the other question, sort of what the guy before me brought up, is what can be done on, I obviously understand, federal preemption, commerce clause, that sort of stuff. What can be done on a city, municipality level, as some of you guys were talking about, city or state level, to push the net neutrality cause? I mean, is it completely in the FCC's hands, or is the fact that cities generally give permits and franchise whatever to these cable companies to put in their wires? Is there anything that can be done on that level from city or state?
Bruce, I feel like this is go ahead.
I will defer to you on that.
Well, I'll say there's certainly the bully pulpit at the municipal and state level to exact concessions from the phone companies and cable companies to do business. The cable companies have to get franchised every once in a while, and as part of the franchising agreement, they can compel them to open up the network a little bit more vehemently than they do. They could do the same with the phone companies. You'll find some states and municipalities a little bit more courageous. The problem is, if you think that the FCC and the cable companies wield inordinate power in Washington, relative to the internet companies, they wield even more power at the state and municipal level. They're the only entities that really play at the state utility commissions and with, do it here in New York City. So they've got inordinate power. Now, if that's sufficient to your former question, yes, there were net neutrality, lightweight net neutrality provisions in the merger. That was a decision based on the fact that there was this vertically integrated monopoly that was going to have inordinate power to favor its own content over the content of others. It's short-lived. I think they expire within a year from now. So it will be short-lived, and it only applies to one to which the parties of that particular merger. So that I did say that the FCC has been used. The only way the FCC has actually had the balls to do anything in this regard has been in merger context, where for a couple years they'll pick off one carrier, and then hopefully another carrier will come in and use the merger as the vehicle to do what they don't have the nerve or wherewithal to do in a broader rulemaking context.
Okay. In July 1st, 2014, AARP, Consumer Union, Common Cause used one of our studies and filed a petition with the state of New York to start investigating the flow of money between the affiliates and between the wireless company and the wireline company. But it also asks the question, if Verizon's Fios is Title II, and if it's common carriage, did customers pay for a cable service? Did customers pay for an information service? Moreover, under the state franchise of 1896, I think it is, under that law, if it's common carriage, is everybody entitled, and they paid for it in Title II, is everybody entitled to that in the franchise area? This is actually may turn into a court case. So in some state laws, there are laws that basically say if it's Title II and it's in part of the franchise, then you are obligated. Because if it's a telecommunications service, they're still obligated to offer services under the Communications Act of 1934. And the question is really whether or not they've been paying for it all along under these other titles, and those other titles basically got a free ride.
Hi, my name's Ron. I've been thinking about I've been reading Eric Schmidt's new book, and in it he was talking about the possible balkanization of the internet happening in countries like Iran, and it just made me think probably this might not ever happen, but it made me wonder about poor neighborhoods in Brooklyn where I've seen people who can't afford their electricity bill string an extension cord from a street light to get electricity into their apartment. And I've wondered at what point we might see balkanization at a small level we've seen mesh networks set up in Red Hook by the New America Foundation, which in Hurricane Sandy served the populace better than government services. And I see people selling illegal copies of DVDs on the street in Brooklyn all the time. I wonder at what point people are just going to set up their own media servers and string cables between their apartment windows, and if blowback like that might be a way that poor people have some effect on getting people to offer a way that's easier, so we don't see, so they don't see happen to them what happened to the music industry when it was easier to use Napster to find music than the tools that they were providing. And BitTorrent tends to work faster, doesn't stutter the way Netflix stutters, doesn't seem to get throttled.
Super harsh Netflix burn. I actually have a small answer to this, which is disproportionately lower income people turn to mobile providers. So that's what Boost Mobile provides to citizens. That's what it provides in the market. That's what the 10,000 Sprint prepaid brands provide. That's fundamentally what T-Mobile provides. And that's why T-Mobile offers things like Music Unlimited. So you're already seeing them move away from fixed wireline services that are hyper expensive towards something that has far more utility. And that move, you got to wonder if it's ever going to provide any real pressure. But what is definitely happening is that we are telling our lower income segments of society, you've got to use a worse internet. Because the mobile internet is fundamentally a worse internet than the wireline internet right now. And we regulate it less. And we say you can put data caps on it, and we're not going to worry about net neutrality here because mobile is different and there's a spectrum crunch. So we've already done that a little bit in a very serious way. And that's what all those prepaid SIM cards are doing. So, the FCC, to its credit at this point, the FCC is saying we got to regulate wireless the same as wireline. And they're trying to bring it back because it's already happened. But that's my answer. I'll let these people answer as well. Finally, somebody agrees with me.
Well, at some point, it becomes theft of service. And we've got municipal, state ordinances, statutes, and common law that will go after many of the you've got Verizon trucks and Time Warner trucks rolling down the streets of Brooklyn looking for people who are stealing those sorts of services. Because at some point, the connection's coming from somewhere. At some point, the content's coming. If Aereo can't run what is arguably legitimate antenna-based signals to specifically earmarked consumers, they're not going to put up with consumers jerry-rigging theft of content. Throughout, so what we do have is reformation in our Universal Service Fund. We are supposed to be committed to delivering internet access to our underserved communities through the federal and state Universal Service Funds.
Do we have more questions?
All right, so I'd like to redirect the conversation to where it was veered off at the point of the Q&A session, which is basically you asked a very poignant question, which is how do we disrupt the monopoly that wired internet providers have? And to that effect, I'm sort of wondering if we can elide the undue amount of influence that cable companies have on lobbying power. Doesn't the government have a direct interest in disrupting that market by opening up spectrum of some kind, or wouldn't there be an avenue for government to create an alternative that would provide competition in that space? And I had another point, but I'm nervous, so I'll let you take that.
Well, and Nilay hit it. The white spaces. The battle over white spaces in the old spectrum auction was supposed to do that. The push for municipal Wi-Fi was supposed to do that. We've had a lot of rumblings that this is going to happen. Now, the radios and all the equipment and the revenue model isn't quite there for the folks to actually exploit the white spaces and the Muni Wi-Fi programs, but maybe it will come. I don't know. And you get a lot of pushback. I said before, when they tried to do it in Philadelphia, Verizon shut it down.
I mean, doing anything in Philadelphia is hard because that's where Comcast is. It's like you fought the hardest battle first. Anyway, unless we have one more question, I think we're at time here. We'll do one more. Okay.
This is actually, recontextualizing everything also, and that is about contextualizing within history. It seems like the Time Warner Comcast deal looks to be pretty similar to what has happened in history, be it the Paramount decision or the AT&T breakup in the 80s. Isn't this just inevitable? Aren't we going to get to the monopolistic point and then we're going to have to break it up? Isn't that how America works? Or do you have a more optimistic viewpoint about how we can move forward and prevent this from happening like it happened in the past?
I think regulatory history always proceeds in these sine waves. And yes, we have seen over the past 20 years a period of consolidation. I think we will probably, I say, if we don't resolve something via telecom definitions or net neutrality implementation, the Bell and cable companies will be beset with a losing antitrust battle, the likes of which we saw in 1984, the likes of which we saw in 1956, the likes of which we saw in 1910. You know, we'll see that again at some point if something is resolved. And they may be chilled. They may recognize that they will ultimately lose the antitrust battle. So they may say, you know, this is as far as we're going to go with the mergers. Now, I don't have any problems with most of these horizontal mergers, which is largely what the Time Warner Comcast merge is about. If you have Time Warner, you've got Time Warner. Comcast wasn't even offering service in that region. They've divided up the country. I don't mind a big, bloated, horizontal cable company across the country. We know what they're like. We know what they're dealing with. What I hate is when they get vertically integrated. When Time Warner buys NBC, Comcast buys NBC. I am concerned about Time Warner now having access to NBC plus the Time Warner content. That is a vertically integrated monopoly that I think is very dangerous and controls the entire user experience at that level.
Thank you, Professor. So we have a hard stop at 8:30, but we have a small after party planned at Surf Club right near here. So come on out, keep the conversation going. I'm sure some of our panelists will still join us. So that should be great. Big thank you to all our sponsors, Launch LM, Clio, ISOC-NY. Check us out on legalhackers.org. We have a party coming up on 29th of August. Check it out on Meetup. And finally, huge thanks to our awesome panelists, David Pashman, Althea Erickson, Bruce Kushnick, Jonathan Askin, and Nilay Patel. Thank you all. And hang out, and let's talk some more. Thank you.